Okay, folks, today we're going to talk about the Hemingway reading, okay? And I realize that a number of you haven't completed the bracket activity, but we need to talk a little bit about Hemingway here today, okay? The Hemingway assignment is pretty simple. You were to read the short story Big Two-Hearted River by Ernest Hemingway, then post a Flipgrid video response to the prompt, okay? And the prompt is discuss how Hemingway's story, character, or details from the story relate to the time period of World War I or the Roaring Twenties. How does Hemingway and his storytelling help us to understand the time period and the events surrounding his work? Okay, so this Flipgrid should be at least a minute and show that not only you read the story, but you understand the context. Now, what I'm going to try and do for you today is explain the context of it a little bit better. So when you read the story, you can actually pick out the things where it's like, all right, this is definitely referencing something from the time period, okay? So the main two things to understand, okay, and this is not the greatest I know, and Lauren, forgive me here, I'm going to try my best to get the screen up here, okay? Big Two-Hearted River is going to be a statement about World War I and the Roaring Twenties. And I'm going to give you background on Hemingway. World War I had just happened from 1914 to 1918, if you remember from your world studies. Does anybody remember how long the United States was involved? Oh, we were involved. We were. You're thinking, though, because we were at the tail end. Okay? And here's the thing. World War I is the most ridiculous war when you look at it on its surface. Okay? World War I were caused because of four main causes. M-A-I-N. Anybody remember any of these? Some guy was assassinated.
By another country.
Okay. So you're getting the actual powder keg of the Archduke Francis Ferdinand being assassinated. When he's assassinated, World War I starts. Okay? However, there were four other underlying factors. It would help to know that M-A-I-N all stand for things. Anybody want to take a crack as to what they stand for? Would it help to know we just got done talking about one of these? Imperialism. Sooner or later, when Great Britain, France, Germany, all these countries have expanding empires, sooner or later they're going to bump into each other. And it's going to cause friction. Okay? Remember, they're taking parts of Africa, they're taking parts of Asia, they're taking parts of Latin America, they're expanding throughout the globe. Sooner or later, they're going to have a conflict. Okay? You can't keep expanding without bumping into somebody else and creating an enemy. All right? And there had been minor conflicts all the way through this imperial age. Every once in a while, you know, there was the Boer War down in what is today South Africa, when the British and the Dutch kind of ran into each other and they had a conflict down there. There were conflicts all across the Nile region between the English and pretty much everybody else. If you remember, during imperialism, we had an open door policy in China to make sure that we avoided conflict, okay? That everybody could trade in China and nobody was going to divide it up. But that caused another problem when the Chinese kind of took offense to the fact that other countries were deciding their trade policies. And that's where the Boxer Rebellion came in, okay? All that was happening because of imperialism, okay, in the early 1900s. There was another part of imperialism that led to things like the Spanish-American War. What were the causes of the Spanish-American War? Not like the actual, like, okay, the Maine was sunk. But what was the underlying factor we talked about? It's when I played the stupid songs, and one was patriotic and the other one was aggressive patriotism, which we also call something else. I'm sorry? Nationalism, aggressive nationalism or jingoism plays a large role. We are so proud to be whatever we are that we put every piece of logic aside and just invade and conquer and kill and rape and pillage and murder and not care at all. Okay? In order to rape, pillage, and murder, what do you need? What do we typically call that on a national scale? A military. So militarism. Everybody's building this massive, massive military. And it stands to reason. If you build up the military, sooner or later you want to go play with your toys. We got more tanks than everybody else. Let's go prove it. We got better ships than everybody else. Let's go sink somebody else's navy. Okay? Sooner or later you've invested all this time, effort, and money into it. You might as well go use it. Okay? We call this trigger happy policy. Okay? I can't wait to go show off my big guns by shooting them at somebody. Okay? And finally, usually we see this as a good thing when countries get along, but sometimes it's not. What's a nice way of saying countries are getting along? Alliances. Okay? The problem in the early 1900s is we did not know who was friends with whom. Nobody was, publicizing, hey, our good friends are the Russians, or our good friends are the English, or whatever else. Nobody was saying it out loud. So sure enough, when one gets attacked, the rest all join in. And this causes the weirdest conflict ever. Because when Archduke Francis Ferdinand is killed, Archduke Franz Ferdinand was killed in a small little country known as Serbia. Okay? When he's killed in Serbia, he is the crown prince of a country known as Austria-Hungary. So Austria-Hungary gets so mad at this that they declare war on Serbia. Okay? Serbia is just a small little podunk country. They're not capable at all of fighting this war. So they go to their friends and say, hey, we need help. Now their friends happens to be the Russians. The Russians, Russia, now declare war on Austria-Hungary. Austria-Hungary goes, oh man, we did not expect the Russians to join this conflict. Now why'd the Russians join? The Serbs and the Russians are both Slavic people. They have common ancestry, common religion, common everything. So because of that, the Austria-Hungarians say, all right, well, we have common ancestry with another superpower. So they turn to their friends, Germany, and say, oh my God, we're getting attacked. Help. So Germany declares war on Russia. Russia says, oh man, we did not expect this. Thank God we have friends. And they turn to their alliance with the United Kingdom and France. And both of them declare war on Germany. Germany goes, well, we didn't expect these guys. And man, the British have the greatest navy in the world. We don't. And so they ask their friends, who are desperate to get involved, the Ottoman Empire, now known as Turkey, and they declare war on England and France. This all happened, and yeah, Ottoman Empire actually wanted to get involved. They were itching. They couldn't wait for somebody to ask. All this happens in 1914. This is how the Great War starts, as they call it, the war to end all wars. In 1914, these countries are all at war. What does the United States do? Sit back. Why? Not our fight. Well, yeah, we basically say we're over here, they're over there. It's their problem, not ours. So at the very beginning of the war, the United States declares neutrality. And they don't actually declare it, they just kind of follow a course of neutrality. Okay? Anybody know who the president is in 1914? He had just won the election of 1912 against the combined forces of the Bull Moose Party of Theodore Roosevelt and the Republicans, William Howard Taft. I'm sorry? His name is Wilson. Okay? Good old Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson realizes that in 1914 we are not ready to get into a global conflict. And so he decides we're going to stay the heck out of this. And he sees the problems. He says, look, I know why you guys got into this. And we're not part of this. We're going to hang back, see what happens. And for 3 solid years, they beat the holy hell out of each other. Okay? These countries basically dig trenches all across Europe. They decide to kill each other in massive numbers at battles that really don't achieve too much in the way of goals. You know, the Battle of the Somme, the Battle of Verdun, all of these, they're stalemates. They're not going anywhere. Massive casualties, massive loss of life. The United States stays out of it. All the way up until 1917. 1917 sees us get involved. Anybody remember from your textbook why we get involved? That's World War II.
Germany attacked the ships.
Okay, that's one of them. Very good. The main one is the Lusitania. The Lusitania is a British ship that happened to be transporting American goods and people. Okay, there were people on the ship, and it was sunk off the coast of Ireland by the Germans, a German U-boat, okay, which is the precursor to the modern day submarine. Okay, they sunk it. The Lusitania goes down. 200 people, 200 Americans lose their lives. Okay, now we didn't jump into the war immediately because of that, but it certainly pushed us towards war. Okay, because the Germans had fired on a ship that had no guns on it. Okay. And it's always kind of been an unwritten rule of war up until this point that you leave civilians alone. World War I throws that out the window, okay? Because Germany makes war on civilians, okay? The other major reason is what is known as the Zimmermann note, sometimes also called the Zimmermann telegram. Written by Alfred Zimmermann. The last name is Zimmermann. What nation do you think he comes from? Alfred Zimmermann. He's German. Okay? He is a German ambassador to Mexico. He sends a note to Mexico and says, hey, you know, it'd be great if you guys would start a war with the United States and keep them occupied so that they don't come over here. Because Zimmermann and the German government, and the German government during World War I was under the guidance of who? Good, nobody said Hitler. World War I, Hitler is a small little crappy bicycle rider in the German military. He's believe it or not, he's Austrian. He's not even German. Okay, he goes into the German army specifically to get German citizenship. Okay, because he doesn't like the Austrians. He thinks the Austrians are weak. He thinks the Germans are the master race. This is the start of his Nazi ideology during World War I. But he's basically just a messenger boy on the front. He gets wounded a bunch, and he ends up getting high-level citations and stuff during the war. So he's got a good war record. But to think that he's this German war hero is misguided at best. If anything, he was just target practice for the other side while he was riding a bike. Okay? Bottom line is, Hitler is not anywhere close to the leadership of Germany at the time. Germany was still under the guidance of Kaiser Wilhelm II.
What did you say?
Kaiser Wilhelm! It's a great German name. Kaiser basically is German for king. And it's Wilhelm, or Wilhelm in English, okay? But in German, it's Kaiser Wilhelm, the second.
Very aggressive.
The son of Kaiser Wilhelm, the first. But the Kaiser had gotten us into all this, and he gets blamed for most of it. Now, keep in mind, who actually started the war?
Austria.
Okay, Austria, Hungary, and Serbia, right? Yet the Kaiser is the one we're worried about. And not surprisingly, why does he get blamed? He gets the United States involved. Unwittingly, it's not like he tried to do it. And if anything, he tried to avoid it, okay? But the Zimmerman note basically was a message to Mexico saying, if you can attack the United States, and we had had problems with Mexico, okay? Mexico had had problems with us. Our southern border was very, very fluid with soldiers and conflicts and whatever else. It's not like our Canadian border that we just forget exists. We are actually fighting along that, and we were trying to actually help the Mexicans to rid themselves of a, it depends on who you ask in Mexico. Some call him a patriot, some people call him a traitor, some people call him any number of things. A guy named Pancho Villa. Pancho Villa had been basically trying to take over the government of Mexico for a very long time, and the United States was involved in trying to get rid of him. So we had gotten ourselves involved in Mexican politics. Of course, they're still kind of smarting from the Mexican War, even though that was a half century beforehand. They're still upset about it. We had taken places like California from them, so it's not like they were exactly happy with us. So sure enough, when the Mexican government gets this telegram, they don't know, the Germans or the Mexicans, they don't know that we have actually tapped the lines. We're reading this. We actually have the telegram, okay? We're spying on it. Can Wilson run out and be like, hey, I have this telegram that proves that the Germans are trying to undermine us? By doing so, you'd have to admit, hey, we're spying on Mexico and Germany simultaneously. So what does he do instead? He waits for the Germans to slip up and says, through our channels of spy networks in England and France, we found out that the Germans have been conspiring against us. And he goes to the Congress and asks for a declaration of war. Because remember, in the United States, the only people that can declare war are Congress. When was the last time we declared war in the United States, by the way? More. We never declared war in Vietnam. It was a police action. Now, of course, if it looks like a war and smells like a war, it's probably a war, but an official declared war. World War II. Never declared war in Korea. We never declared war in Vietnam. We have not declared war in Iraq or Afghanistan. We are merely doing military maneuvers and police actions during that time period. Product of the Cold War. We never want to call anything a war because we're afraid of the connotations about it. We don't want people to think that the democracy, the superpower, is declaring war on small countries that can't defend themselves. Okay? So bottom line is, we get involved in World War I. Wilson goes to Congress, asks for a declaration of war. Now, Wilson had won re-election in 1916, literally a year prior to it, on a banner that said he kept us out of war. They re-elected him because we were not involved in World War I. Everybody's like, hey, this is our guy. He's kept us out of it. 1 year later, he's like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to go in. And so we ship off our entire, military, and we were known as doughboys when we showed up. Okay, that term comes up from every now and then. Why? These hardened veterans in the trenches, they've got mud and dirt and grime and grease and everything, and they've been outside in the cold and the sun and everything for 3 years if they were lucky enough to survive the trenches for that long, and most of them did not. And they just looked like they were just grizzled veterans. And here comes our 18, 19, 20-year-old Americans coming in, very pale white, ready to fight. Here we go. Okay. And our commanders, a guy named Roebling, okay, looks at the entire situation and goes, what are we doing here? Trenches? No, we got tanks. So he starts rolling the tanks across the trenches and says, we're going to do a little open field running. And he trains tank commanders. One of the main ones, a guy named George Patton, who eventually becomes one of our greatest generals of World War II. He's just a tank commander back then. They basically use it as a training run for World War II. Okay? Now, that's not to say we don't have casualties. We do. We have people killed during the conflict without question. But bottom line is, we provide kind of the last little oomph to get them across the finish line. And the reason that we are necessary in a major way is because by 1917, this country is no longer in the conflict. Anybody know what happens in Russia in 1917? Something to do with the Soviet Union. It has everything to do with the Soviet Union. The revolution. Russian Revolution happens in 1917. The Russians get tired of the Tsar, and they basically overthrow his regime under the guidance of a guy named Vladimir Lenin. Okay? Lenin takes over. The Tsar and his family are eventually murdered. The revolution basically produces the Soviet Union, and they declare their own peace with Germany and move on with life.
Oh, isn't that what that one movie's like based off of? That like animated movie? I forget what it's called.
Anastasia?
Yeah.
Yeah. Under the premise that she survived. Spoiler alert, she did not. Whole family's wiped out. Okay? As is Rasputin. If you ever want to read about a crazy character in history, Rasputin. Okay? That is one crazy man. And his death is even more ridiculous. Okay? Nikolai Rasputin. Nikolai Rasputin? I can't remember. Rasputin, whatever the heck his first name is. Rasputin was the secret advisor to the Tsar. He basically was this medicine man from the outskirts, the podunk areas of Russia, who came into the Tsar's orbit because he managed to figure out ways to calm the crown prince. Okay, the crown prince had hemophilia. So anytime he would get a bruise or a cut, it was very painful because hemophilia means you don't clot properly. So if you get a bruise, like you guys have all had that really bad bruise on an arm or a leg where you're like, man, this hurts. And it limits your motion because the blood clot is there and it's very large and it's causing a problem. Well, somebody with hemophilia, it continually bleeds internally and it could be fatal. And it's super painful for somebody that has hemophilia. Okay? So they're trying to protect the air. So they brought Rasputin in because he said he had the ability to calm him and to cure him. And for some reason, he always seemed to have a calming influence over the crown prince. So therefore, the whole royal family really liked him, you know, because he basically lived up to the hype. The problem was he starts giving advice. And there are a lot of people in Russia don't like the fact that the Tsar is taking advice from this crazy man, okay? This little shaman from the outskirts, okay? This podunk guy that, you know, where did he come from and who the heck does he think he is? Well, all throughout the war, it's not going very well. The Russian military decides that they got to get rid of this guy. And so they set him up to be assassinated. And their assassination plan is quite simple. They invite him over for a meeting, and they're going to serve him alcohol, they're going to give him wine, and they're going to give him cakes that are laced with poison. They put a bunch of arsenic in the wine and everything, and he drinks like a bottle and a half of the wine and shows no effect. Okay? He eats a couple of cakes, no effect. The reason was they didn't take Stoser's chemistry class. They didn't realize that the poison that they were using was counterbalanced by the alcohol they were serving. So yeah, and the thing was that it diluted the alcohol so much that he wasn't even getting drunk. He was pounding alcohol, and they're like, he should at least be tipsy. I mean, let's be honest, he should be dead by this point. And even the guy who's like serving him, he's going back into the kitchen going, hey, this guy is taking enough to kill a horse, and nothing's happening to him. So the leader of this little coup decides enough's enough. He does exactly what Cameron says, and he just walks out and shoots him. Okay? Says, done. They're like, all right, well, now we got to get rid of the body. So they go to get some chains to tie up the body. Okay? They come back in, he's gone. They shot him in the head and the chest, and he's gone. Like, did somebody move the body? Did somebody hear about it? They look out back. He's crawling through the backyard and then crawling onto the fence area to get away. So they shoot him again. Okay? They then tie him to a post. Okay? And they stab him a couple of times just for good measure to make sure that he is completely dead. They tie him to this post with a metal chain and then throw him into the icy river. Thinking, all right, done. They ended up finding the body later on but there were signs of a struggle. So the dude wasn't even dead then. Shot him in the head, the chest, stabbed him a couple of times. He got shot in the back for trying to climb over the fence. Most people would have bled out by that point. No, he was still trying to get the chains off, and his actual death was by drowning. Okay, so to say that he scared the living bejesus out of the Russian people is, I mean, it's an understatement. Okay, so if you ever get a chance to look into him, he's a strange character, to say the least. Okay, bottom line is, the Russian royal family loses a lot of credibility for their association with him amongst bad decisions during the war, and the Russian Revolution takes place. Eventually, the entire Russian royal family, including Anastasia, are killed, okay? And Russia becomes the Soviet Union, all right? That's kind of the backstory to that. Now, here's the thing. After all this takes place, the United States manages to be kind of the turning point in the struggle. Our inclusion in the war ends up bringing it to a much quicker result, I should say. And so sure enough, in 1918, we declare an armistice on the 11th day of the 11th month at the 11th hour, known as Armistice Day. We now call it Veterans Day, okay? Armistice is called, that means they have a ceasefire all throughout the world, and they start negotiating the treaty. And they come up with the treaty in 1919, but that is not before Wilson tries to kind of solve the problems that led to the war. So Woodrow Wilson comes in to Versailles, which is the palace just outside of Paris that caused the French Revolution, if you remember. Okay, the Palace of Versailles still stands. If you ever get a chance to go over to Paris, you need to go out to Versailles. When you're taking the tour, you will absolutely see why they killed him. Okay, because that was his summer palace, his vacation home. It's huge. Okay, and if you ever walk the grounds there, it's ridiculous how large the gardens are. Okay, I'm telling you right now, I was in like the second room of the palace, and I was like, yeah, I can see why they killed him, right here. Like, I'd be ticked too. Okay, Wilson goes over to Versailles, and he basically meets with David Lloyd George, who is from the UK, George Clemenceau, who's France, and a bunch of other leaders from places like Italy, but we don't even bother really consulting them. It's really just George and Clemenceau, because the Russians are no longer a factor. We don't really factor in any of the other allies. The main two are George Clemenceau. Well, Wilson comes into the Treaty of Versailles, and he has put together a plan, and his plan is called the 14 Points. And it's literally a list of things he thinks need to happen. Okay? And he basically says, we need to limit the militaries of major offensive nations. We need to declare our alliances to be completely open so everybody knows who's friends with whom. We need to limit the imperial ambitions of countries and say, you know what, we're not going to be as imperialistic as we used to be. And we need to start divvying up these major nations to make sure that, you know, groups are represented. Places like Poland and, Austria and Hungary are separated. And, make sure that these national belief structures are embraced and, they're not feeling like they're superior to anybody else. So in reality, what is he doing through the 14 points? Okay, well, eventually, they're going to call it something else. They're going to call it the League of Nations, which is the only one of the 14 points that actually occurs. The others are ignored. But what is he doing? If he's saying, hey, we need to limit the militaries and we need to declare our alliances openly and we need to kind of curtail our imperial ambitions. If he's saying this needs to be part of the peace treaty, what is he saying we need to do? What were the problems that led to the war, folks? He's actually solving the problems. He's addressing them, saying if militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism is what got us here, well, let's avoid them in the future. He's doing this weird thing where he said, hey, history taught us something. Let's avoid it in the future. Okay? So the 14 points, along with the League of Nations, which is the 14th point, like I said, it's the only one that makes it into the actual treaty. The other 13 are ignored. Versailles, instead, produces a treaty in 1919 whose primary purpose was to punish Germany. They make them pay reparations. They say they can't have a military. They basically take away all chances of this government from surviving. Okay? They make Germany a very weak country. They take property away from them. They create Poland out of what Germany had already taken. And they basically gave land back to France. They did all this stuff from Germany. They took and took and took. And every one of their colonies, they say, you're no longer German. Now you're French, you're British, you're whatever, you're Dutch. You know, they basically divvy up everything that Germany had. They basically beat up Germany and took its lunch money. Okay? It was terrible. So the Treaty of Versailles makes Germany almost a toothless state. They really have no way of defending themselves. Wilson says, this is not what we need to do. George and Clemenceau says, hey, have you been fighting these guys for 4 years? Have you seen half your male population of 20-year-olds die? We have. So we're punishing them so this never happens again. That was their mindset. Wilson kind of says, all right, well, I understand where you're coming from, but I don't think this is the right way to go. He was correct. Had we gone with the 14 points, World War II may not have happened. Okay? Instead, we go with the Treaty of Versailles. Now, Wilson comes back to the United States, tries to promote this idea that, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to have this treaty. You know, this is a good treaty. The United States government, and keep in mind, who actually has to say that treaties are okay? Who has to certify it? One specific part of Congress. Congress is two houses. Which house? That's a different branch. There's a House and there's a House of Representatives and a Senate. The Senate is the one that actually has to okay treaties. Okay? So they okay the treaty. They basically say, all right, this is how we're going to do it. They put it in front of the Senate. The Senate says, no, we're not doing it. Okay? Led by a guy named, Henry Cabot Lodge. It was three names. Sorry, it's early. Henry Cabot Lodge from Massachusetts is the main senator, and he says, we're not doing this because this is an international agreement. We're staying the heck out of things. Stop getting our hands in everybody else's business. We should have never been in World War I to begin with. So they reject the treaty. Wilson travels the country trying to talk this up, trying to get people on board with the treaty. He works so hard he gives himself a stroke. Okay? Wilson is incapacitated in the White House for about 3 months. Yet bills continue to get passed and vetoed, and the business of government continues. How? The president is a drooling vegetable in bed for about 3 months. His wife did it. His wife, Edith, his second wife, by the way, his first one died. Wilson got remarried while he was in the White House. Okay? His wife, Edith, every morning would take all the business and newspapers and everything else into the bedroom with his breakfast. She said she would read everything to him, and he would say yes or no as to whether or not he wanted to do it. He would sign it. She'd send it back to Congress. Never mind, the signature looked awfully different. She blamed it on the stroke. In reality, she was the president of the United States for 3 months. Because there's no way in his capacity he was going to be able to do the job. So whenever somebody says, oh, our first female president could have been Hillary Clinton, we already had a female president. About 3 months in 1919. Wilson recovers enough to where he wants to run for a third term. The Democrats say, nah, it's probably not a good idea. So they bypass him, and they nominate a guy from Ohio, a governor of Ohio, a guy named James Cox, okay, from Dayton. The Republicans counter with another guy from Ohio, a senator by the name of Warren G. Harding. Harding gets elected, and the 1920s start with a Republican president. Okay, so they switch parties again. League of Nations ends up failing. because the United States never gets involved. Why? We rejected the treaty, so therefore we're not going to be part of the League of Nations. They also don't allow the Germans and the Japanese to join. This is a problem because the two nations that have grievances have no place to take them. So instead, they turn to leadership, so it's not a surprise that a little podunk delivery boy from the front lines of World War I rises slowly through the ranks, even after going to prison, and becomes Chancellor of Germany by 1933. Okay, most people forget, Adolf Hitler was elected. Okay, the Germans chose him. Why? He was the only one saying, dare I say it, make Germany great again. Okay, so he rose through the ranks. Remember, he went to prison, still managed to become Chancellor of Germany. Okay, the Japanese turn towards their roots and they basically promote the emperor and they follow him all the way into World War II. So look, I always call World War II the war so nice we fought it twice. Okay, because it's merely a continuation with a 20-year interlude between World War I and World War II. Yes, sir.
Why did they not let Japan?
Japan kept on taking over places. They kept on, they were taking over places in Southeast Asia. They were taking over what is today Thailand and Laos. And this sounds familiar. That whole area is taken over, excuse me, by the Japanese. And then after the war, it's taken over by the French. And then the French fail. So then we step in, and that's how we ended up in Vietnam. That whole area has been a mess for a long time because of outside influence. But because Japan basically was going against the League of Nations keeps on saying, hey, you shouldn't do that. And they finally just say, you know what? We're not even going to be part of you guys. They basically resigned. Because, look, the League of Nations at this point is being run by the British and the French. And the Japanese are like, and us. And they're like, no. I mean, this is the League of Nations. Civilized nations should be running this. And Japanese take offense to not being called civilized. Because when they're saying, well, you're being imperial, they're like, Britain and France, really? You're going to blame us for being imperial? Like, sun never sets on the British Empire, not the Japanese. Hello? Okay. So not surprisingly, this all devolves into all kinds of stuff. Now, we don't care. Why? We're not involved. We basically start our process of isolationism. We want no part of international conflict. We want no part of international problems. We're going to stay out of it. And not surprisingly, when we start worrying about ourselves and ourselves alone, the post-war economy is booming. And so sure enough, the roaring 20s start. And it's because of policies known as laissez-faire, where we just let the economy go. There's no governmental control. And it's not just Warren G. Harding. Warren G. Harding actually has no part in this, because Warren G. Harding, if you can imagine, just try and stick with me here. The United States in 1920 elected a man that was woefully incompetent and didn't really care to do the job. Warren G. Harding really didn't want to be president. His wife made him do it. He didn't really like his wife all that much. Like, he respected her, kind of, but he married her for her money. The Secret Service secretly called her the Duchess because she wanted everything to be just so. Like, she wanted to be president of the United States. She wanted to be first lady. She wanted her husband to be president more than he wanted to be president. Now, he liked the perks. He liked being in charge. He didn't really like meetings. He didn't really like making decisions, per se. He'd prefer everybody else kind of do it for him. He was much more interested in his secretaries, plural. He changed a coat closet in the White House Oval Office into a nice little bedroom. He claimed, I need a cot in there because my back hurts, so he would go in and take a nap. Problem is, he was taking a nap with his secretaries. There's actually a buzzer installed by the Secret Service to let him know his wife was on the way to the Oval Office. Little warning bell, 2-minute warning, she's on her way. Get yourself presentable and back to the desk. Harding eventually died in office. We're not sure if he had a stroke, a heart attack, or if his wife killed him. We still don't know. There is, of course, a growing amount of historians that believe that she snuck something into his food. Needless to say, he died. His vice president takes over. His vice president is a guy named Calvin Coolidge. Calvin Coolidge is the quietest man to ever be president of the United States. Okay, he does not like small talk. If you were to say, man, what nice weather we're having. He'd say, well, it is spring, and then he'd walk away. Stop talking about things that don't matter. He hated small talk. I think I told your cohort before, though, he's the one that liked balance, 12 hours awake, 12 hours of sleep every day. Four meals a day, because 3 is an odd number, and why would you do that? He was very type A personality. Not surprisingly, his economic policies make the roaring 20s. Why? Government should not be involved in the economy, and the economy should not tell the government what to do. Because of that, the economy booms. Does that mean everybody's making money? No. But it does mean some people are doing awfully well. So that's where the roaring 20s comes from. Now, the people that aren't doing well are represented by a number of different things. And one of them is a group of writers known as the Lost Generation. These writers are predominantly people like F. Scott Fitzgerald, who's famous for writing The Great Gatsby, and Ernest Hemingway. Hemingway, and this is kind of the background to the article that you're going to read, his short story. Hemingway writes some of the greatest novels in American history. He writes The Sun Also Rises. He writes Farewell to Arms, and For Whom the Bell Tolls, okay, amongst many others, okay? He's famous for his short stories as well. You're going to read one of them. What you have to understand about Hemingway is he served in World War I as a medic, okay? He basically went behind enemy lines to grab people who had been shot or, wounded in some way or whatever else, and took them back to the hospitals. He saw death on the battlefields. He was part of barrages of poison gas. He was in the trenches when they were hit by shells. The man had shell shock. What do we currently call that? PTSD. After the war, he's never treated for it. Okay? Because they didn't really understand it. We still don't really understand it. Instead, he self-medicates, meaning he drinks a lot. Here's the thing, with PTSD, you lose all of your ability to feel. You don't get emotions. You don't feel the same way as other people. So not surprisingly, Ernest Hemingway writes that way. Okay? His writings are very uncaring, unfeeling, and very disconnected. You will see that in the short story. You ever notice that writers tend to care about their characters? You read Harry Potter, doesn't J.K. Rowling kind of root for Harry Potter? You read it, it's not like she's critical of Harry, okay? You read any novel, most of the people are like, oh, this character is just misunderstood, or this character will finally succeed, or whatever else. This is not how Hemingway writes. Hemingway writes as if the character is not even related to him in any way, shape, or form. You have all read books where you're like, dear God, get to the point. You've all read, and they walked through the trees, and the trees were luscious, and they were blowing in the breeze. Hemingway doesn't give a damn about the breeze. When he says, the stream flowed and was blue as if it were crystal, he just says the water was blue. It's a river, it flows.
It's a prohibition, but it won't be.
Yeah, it's prohibition, but yet he's still drinking. So do laws matter to him very much? Hell no. He's Ernest Hemingway, damn it. And just because they made alcohol illegal doesn't mean that, it's not there. Prohibition, for God's sakes, we made drugs illegal. How's that working out? Okay? Americans always find a way to get stuff if they really want it, okay? But needless to say, Hemingway writes about this time period, and he is really pissed off about the 1920s. How is it we can fight this war, the war to end all wars, bring these guys home, and have a situation where some are doing really well and others are kind of trampled on? And so the lost generations of writers, to sum up, basically saying, are pointing out how hypocritical all of you are. How can you believe America is the greatest in the world when this is what we're doing to veterans, or this is what we're doing to the workers, or this is what we're doing to the young people, the youth, whatever. He basically is calling us out for being stupid. When you read the article, and I'm going to bring it up here, Big Two-Hearted River. And I don't expect you to like understand all of this, okay? Big 200. The train went up on the track out of sight around one of the hills of burnt timber. Nick sat down on the bundle of canvas and bedding. The baggage man had pitched out of the door of the baggage car. There was no town, nothing but rails and the burned over country. The 13 saloons that had lined one street of Sene had not left a trace. The foundations of the Mansion House Hotel stuck up above the ground. The stone was chipped and split by the fire. It was all that was left of the town of Sene. Even the surface had been burned off the ground, okay? Can we pick up anything from the 1920s or World War I from any of that? Just that short little snippet. Burned over country, burned down village. Where has he seen burned over country, burned down villages, and destroyed buildings? Okay, this guy's a World War I veteran. Okay, and I'd like to point out the 13 saloons that had lined one street had not left a trace. 13 saloons are gone. Prohibition, right? He is absolutely telling you what this time period is like. I'll give you a key to this. His main character, Nick, looked at the burned over stretch of hillside where he had expected to find the scattered houses of the town and then walk down the railroad track to the bridge over the river. The river was there. It swirled against the log spires of the bridge. Nick looked down to the clear brown water, colored from the pebbly bottom, and watched the trout keeping themselves steady in the current with wavering fins. As he watched them, they changed again by quick angles, only to hold steady in the fast water again. Nick watched them a long time. He watched them holding themselves with their noses in the current, many trout in the deep, fast-moving water, slightly distorted as he watched far down through the glassy convex surfaces of the pool, its surface pushing and swelling smooth against the resistance of the log-driven piles of the bridge. At the bottom of the pool were the big trout. Nick did not see them at first. Then he saw them at the bottom of the pool, big trout looking to hold themselves on the gravel bottom in a varying mist of gravel and sand raised in spurts by the current. Nick looked down into the pool from the bridge. It was a hot day. A kingfisher flew up the stream. It was a long time since Nick had looked into the stream and seen trout. They were very satisfactory. As the shadow of the kingfisher moved up the stream, excuse me, a big trout shot upstream in a long angle, only his shadow marking the angle, then lost his shadow as he came through the surface of the water, caught the sun, and then as he went back into the stream under the surface, his shadow seemed to float down the stream with the current unresisting to his post under the bridge, where he tightened facing up into the current. Okay, Nick's heart tightened as the trout moved. He felt the old feeling. He turned and looked down the stream. It stretched away, pebbly bottom. Now, here's the thing. You would think he's describing everything. Dear God, this guy's going way too much into detail. But notice how none of his sentences are developed. And is he like, oh, I wonder what the trout is thinking? Like, he doesn't wonder about anything. He's just describing what is there. They say, oh, he marveled at this movement for hours on end. No, Nick watched it a long time. Okay? If this is how Nick sees things, what does Nick have? All he sees is burned out things and odd movements. Things that used to be there but now are not. He's got PTSD. Where other people see burned out area or a town, he sees burned out areas. Now, this is the part that I don't expect anybody really to get. And this is kind of what I'm going to leave you with, because when you read this, it becomes very clear. What towns in America at this point, we're talking about the early 1900s, 19 teens and 20s, would look burned out? Meaning that the houses might look like they're, blackened, sooty as if they've been on fire, but in reality, they're fine. Would it help to point out, if I want to heat my house nowadays, I turn on the furnace. Back in the early 1900s, if I wanted to heat my house, what did I have to do? start a fire, what do you typically burn in those heaters? Coal. You know what coal does when you burn it? Soot kicks off. Soot is what color? When it floats through the air and settles on the sides and the tops of houses, what does it do? Makes it look like they've been burned. It's got a black film on it. I don't know if you guys have ever driven up to Chicago and driven through Gary, Indiana. Those older houses in Gary, Indiana all look like they've been on fire at some point in their existence, but they're fine. They just have been discolored by coal usage. Okay, this happened if you drive up into certain areas of Cleveland, same deal. If you've ever gone to Pittsburgh, that whole area has problems with that because of the steel mills. Okay, so what is this guy really doing? He's seeing a burned out village. In reality, it's a coal mining town or a steel town. Okay, so he's seeing the remnants of big business, but he's disaffected by it. He doesn't see it. Okay.
So the trout doesn't mean anything?
I'm sorry?
You said earlier that he hasn't really like elaborated on something. Does the trout mean anything?
If I see, here's the thing, you guys all have done this at some point in your life. You're by a river or you're by a pond and you see fish in the pond or river. And you sit there and stare. Don't you kind of sit there and stare at it like, wow, that's really majestic, or that's beautiful, or that's pretty cool, all right. And if I asked you to write about it, you would probably tell me about emotions and how, man, they really kind of glide, and you know, they came out of the water, and I saw one jump out of the water, and it was really majestic. He just said, well, jumped out of the water, caught the sun, and that was it. So does he see life? Certainly doesn't see the beauty in it. Okay? And as you read the story, he sets up a campground and starts, you know, putting all this stuff out. And, you know, they kind of describe his daily, you know, his daily kind of regimen, if you will. You start to realize he's completely disaffected by everything that's happening around him. Okay? If you go into this story reading it that way, you'll start really seeing some of the symbolism. Okay? Now, again, this is kind of your assignment for this week, obviously. And thank you, Lauren, for hanging on. I'm not sure if you're still there or not, but.
I'm here.
All right, Lauren. Good work. And look, I don't want to belabor the point too much here, but bottom line is when you read this story, kind of keep that in mind that the main character, Nick, is disassociated. He doesn't see things the way you and I do. Okay? So always keep that in mind. I'll give you a little hint. At some point, he looks at a grasshopper. He describes the grasshopper, but it's not how you and I would describe the grasshopper. Okay? And there's a reason why he describes it the way he does. Okay? When he sets up his tent, his little campground, there's a reason that he's doing it. Okay? Just kind of look into it. And look, do I expect you to have a master's thesis on this? No. But try and pick out the things in the story that might be explained because of a PTSD guy during World War I coming back to the 1920s where everything's boom and everything's, oh, we're doing great and look at this and you know, we're all making money and we're all doing really well. Obviously not everybody is, which is the whole purpose of the Lost Generation writers. F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ernest Hemingway, they are all pointing out the problems of society. They are all kind of bringing attention to the fact that the life in 1920s America isn't always great. It's pretty bad, okay? You know, not everybody's doing well. Because look, whenever you read about the 1920s, Roaring 20s America in the textbook, it always makes it seem like everything's fine. What he's pointing out is, no, it's not. Not everything is fine. Some things are bad, okay? Questions, comments, concerns? Lauren, any questions?
No.
Okay, fantastic. Here's the thing. This is due on Thursday, so what I would like you to do is either read it today or tomorrow, Okay. If you have questions, obviously I'll be here. You can always email me. You can ask me on the remote learning day tomorrow. Remote day tomorrow is just as simple as making sure everybody's caught up on the assignments we currently have, because there are a lot of you that struggle with the bracket activity. And then we are also going to transition over and talk about the LEQ assignment for over break. Okay, so just kind of hang in there tomorrow. I'm going to try and make tomorrow's session pretty quick. Okay, I'm hoping that most of it's going to be like, here's what's going on, and then question and answer the rest of the time. So once we hit the Q&A section, if you don't have any questions, then you can feel free to log off tomorrow. Okay, so like I said, maybe 10, 15 minutes, and then peace out, Girl Scout. As for that, Lauren, it's a pleasure seeing you. I'm sure Anna says goodbye. Barbara already left without saying bye.
Bye, Lauren.
Wow. Bye.
Have a good one, Lauren.
You too.